Hi everyone, my name is Micah McLean and I'm the creator of Micah McLean Talks. Today you're watching my interview with Sir Peter Wanless, the Chief Executive of the NSPCC. Please remember to like, share, subscribe and comment, and I hope you enjoy this interview. Thank you. Good afternoon, Sir Peter.
Good afternoon. Lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for coming onto the platform. You are the Chief Executive of the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the NSPCC.
That's right. And that's a role that I've had now for just over 10 years.
Thank you so much for coming onto the platform. So please tell us about your early life growing up and your journey to becoming Chief Executive of the NSPCC.
Well, at the NSPCC, we say that it's childhood that shapes who you become. So my childhood was growing up in a place called Chippenham in Wiltshire. My dad was a music teacher. My mum was also a teacher for a while, also very charitable person. And they both loved cricket. And so when I was growing up, I either wanted to be a cricketer for England or a rock star to impress my dad. And I ended up doing a job in charity, which I'm sure would have impressed both of them, but particularly my mum. It's quite a long story in terms of how I got from being a young boy in Chippenham to ending up running the NSPCC. But I suppose I followed things I was interested in. So I liked history and politics at school. I went and did that at university. I chose a university that had a test match cricket ground in the city, which was Leeds. Had an enjoyable 3 years there. I joined the civil service because I was interested in politics. I actually failed the civil service graduate entrance exam, which has given me a bit of a chip on my shoulder. I think that it was a rather old-fashioned process that you had to go through. But once I got a job in the civil service, I had a range of exciting and interesting jobs. Actually, my lucky break was from being a rather obscure junior Treasury official. There was a minister who subsequently became the Prime Minister, John Major, who was looking for a junior private secretary, and he was struggling. I think he used to make a big deal about having not been to Oxford or Cambridge and liking his sports. And I think I was one of the few people in the Treasury who hadn't been to Oxford or Cambridge. And at his interview with me, we talked about cricket, and that was my lucky break. And from then on, I just had a succession of really interesting and important jobs in the Treasury, in the Department for Education, and ultimately out into charity, working with children at the NSPCC.
That's really interesting. So you went from working under John Major and other secretaries to charity. So what motivated your decision to go from the civil service to charity?
I think that I loved the politics and the influence and the importance of being involved with government. And most of my 20s, I worked in private office for a succession of government ministers, and that was quite exhilarating. I then became a father, and I moved to the Department for Education, and all of a sudden it was much more than a game, politics. It was genuinely about how to help children and young people be really well educated and get on in life. And I think that that was a bit of a turning point for me. I mean, politics always mattered, but it really mattered when we were talking about the life chances of children. And so that got me interested in children's issues. I left government to become the chief executive of what was then called the Big Lottery Fund and is now called the National Lotteries Community Fund, which distributes money raised for good causes by the National Lottery to charities and community groups. Now, that was a bit of a sort of halfway house between government and the charitable sector, because although people think of the lottery fund as being independent, it's actually subject to government directions. And so they wanted and needed someone who could lead that fund, who was politically well connected and could influence a really good space for the lottery to do important and interesting things. But it also got me closer to charities and community groups. And I saw so many amazing causes and extraordinary people doing wonderful things that that was the lovely thing about the lottery job, but it was also the limiting thing. You weren't actually yourself responsible for working directly with the people that the charities were benefiting. So it was probably from there quite a natural step to move out and be directly involved with a charity that day to day was making life-changing impacts for children and young people, which of course was the subject matter that I'd been so interested in when I'd been a civil servant at the Department for Education. When you look back, there's quite a logic to it. When I was living this life, I was mostly just doing things I was interested in, trying to work with people who I enjoyed working with and admired and respected. It's much more important, I think, to be working somewhere where you are having fun and feeling like you're making a difference than constantly wondering, where's my next job going to be? What's my life path? I didn't, at no particular moment until the moment I got the NSPCC job, did I think that this would be the sort of role I would end up in.
Thank you. That's really inspirational, even your motivations for joining the NSPCC. So following on from that, you've touched upon your work with the Big Lottery Fund. What skills are needed to become a chief executive officer at any level?
I think that the most important skill in a leader is being authentic, being true to yourself, and being well motivated to achieve what it is the organization is seeking to achieve. I think it's really important to be able to work well with people, to build teams, to appreciate and understand what motivates people individually and collectively, so that they can share your sense of purpose and passion. And I think it's important to have a vision, a sense of the difference that you want to make, the destination that you want to get to, that is sufficiently ambitious, that mean that people want to follow you, but not so far removed that really practical people who have lots of difficult questions at any given moment can feel is within their grasp to achieve. So yeah, authenticity, clarity of purpose, and people skills, I think, are probably the three most important things.
Thank you so much for that. And following on from that, the NSPCC has helped around 6.6 million children to become safer from abuse between 2016 to 2021. Please, could you share with us the scope, range, and the different challenges facing the NSPCC in the protection of children?
Yeah, sure. So, as you say, our charitable purpose is to prevent cruelty to children. And we can do that by doing things ourselves, by enabling others to do things, and by influencing lots of people to achieve more for children than would otherwise be the case. So the NSPCC delivers services that prevent cruelty to children. So, for example, we are in 90% of primary schools, delivering assemblies and workshops that help young children understand the nature of abuse in age-appropriate ways and what to do if they have a worry or concern. We teach them the notion of a safe adult, And if there isn't a safe adult in their life, they can always contact Childline, which is another service the NSPCC runs 24/7 for any child who's got a worry or a concern. So prevention services are important, but helping children recover from abuse and understand that when something terrible happens to them, it's not their fault, that really matters too. So we test and evidence some really cutting edge services that are designed to help children recover from abuse, not so that we can then deliver them at scale, but we can share that learning with the wider system so that they can get better and better at helping children who otherwise might be failed by the system. And then we also campaign to change attitudes, behaviours and laws so that the world is a safer place for children. A lot of time and effort has been spent over the last few years, for example, campaigning for an online safety bill. We believe that the online world should be as safe for children as the offline world. It's where children spend increasingly large proportions of their lives. But unfortunately, lots of the services and places where children and young people go online haven't had the basics of child protection designed into them in the way we've come to expect toys or playgrounds or other services and areas where children go to pay attention to the obvious and preventable risks that children might otherwise face. So those are some of the kind of big areas of activity which we're working on. You know, one of the hardest things I have to do as a chief executive is to make choices about where we are and where we aren't going to be involved, because people think of us as a big charity, but actually we're tiny in relation to the scale of the problem. So it's not enough just for us to do great things for the small number of children, proportionately speaking, who happen to be touched by our services. We need to enable, we need to influence, we need to inspire well beyond anything we can do ourselves if we're going to achieve that charitable purpose which was set for us by our founders in 1884, which is the prevention of cruelty to children.
For today's children, social media is unavoidable. But as its popularity grows, so do the risks of being online. When she was 15 years old, Eva was tricked into sending explicit photos to someone she met on social media and believed to be a boy her age. He later revealed himself to be an adult man and threatened to share the photos with her family and friends.
I knew I was in trouble, I just didn't know how to get myself out of it, because the last thing you want to do is tell your mum what you've just done. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. I had school the next day, and I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, like, what have I done? Up until that man got sentenced, I'd had those thoughts of how did I let that happen? And now that's when my perspectives kind of shift to kind of go, actually, he was the one that took advantage of me, and it actually wasn't my fault.
New figures gathered by the NSPCC children's charity show that in the last 6 years, children under the age of 12 made up a quarter of the total number of known victims. Girls were targeted in 83% of cases where the gender was known, and nearly half of the offences took place on Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp. The government wants social media companies to be more responsible for the content published on their platforms. Tech firms are arguing that giving regulators access to scan messages would compromise users' privacy because it would break end-to-end encryption. However, internet safety campaigners are concerned that the technology would be a smokescreen for abusers.
Before you put it into the encrypted channel, it is entirely possible from a technical point of view to scan that content to see if it contains either an illegal image of a child being sexually abused or if it's a sexualized communication with a child. That does not touch or affect encryption at all.
Next month is expected to mark the end of years of legislative wrangling as MPs take a final vote on whether to turn the proposals into law. But passing the bill is only the first step. The biggest challenge for regulators is how to put it into practice. Arti Natchiappan, Sky News.
Thank you so much for that. You mentioned earlier that the NSPCC is in 90% of schools. Is there like barriers preventing you from getting into the other 10%?
Well, when I worked at the Department for Education, I was one of many people there who appreciated and understood how many pressures there are on people leading schools and teaching in schools. There are only so many hours in the day, and there are many, many thousands of individuals and organizations with bright ideas about what kids should be learning during their time at school. So it's an extraordinary achievement, actually, for so many schools to choose to take the Speak Out, Stay Safe service from the NSPCC, because they're under no obligation or requirement to do so. So yeah, I'm a little bit frustrated that there are still 10% of schools we've yet to get to, but I don't think they are deliberately choosing not to engage with us. Perhaps they just haven't quite appreciated yet from their colleagues down the road that this is a really safe and interesting and engaging way to help young children learn the basics of how to stay safe from abuse. There may be, there may be some reluctance. Obviously, one of the abuses which we look to teach young children about is sexual abuse, and that can be quite controversial. So, is it appropriate or inappropriate for young children to be confronted with the risks of sexual abuse? Well, we would say there are ways in which you can help young people understand the risk of being sexually abused without using the word sex or the word abuse. And we have a jolly character called the Pantosaurus, who has a song which young children can sing about how to the parts of the body covered by your underwear belong to you and you alone, and if you have a worry or a concern, talk to a safe adult. So there are ways into these conversations which, when you understand and appreciate them, can be as natural as teaching children the Green Cross Code when it comes to staying safe from traffic. But if you simply go to a school and say, hey, we'd like to teach your 5 to 7 year olds about sexual abuse, they're going to be a little bit reluctant in the first instance, aren't they? Because they're going to wonder, what on earth are you talking about? So there's still a bit of few issues there to overcome, I think.
I think that the work that the NSPCC does there is important, because I was even watching Gary Neville's podcast, and what Deli Ade's story was surrounding how his experience regards to. So it's very important work that you do. So following on from that, you mentioned in an article for the Times about the economic turbulence the cost of living crisis would cause in terms of the protection of children. So could you please tell us about your thoughts on this and how you think the cost of living crisis is affecting the child protection system?
Well, first let's look at it from family and community perspective. So there's absolutely, no direct connection between someone being poor and someone abusing their child. But the pressures and the challenges which families under stress and strain face can heighten the risks for children of being neglected, which is, the absence of appropriate love or the fundamentals in life, or lead adults to crack and abuse one another, and or abuse their children. So that really does need watching, but also, as you kind of hinted at in your question, as the pressures on society rise, there are many and varied things which governments need to spend their money on, and if services to support children get hollowed out, that can create risks as well. And we've been particularly concerned that as the number of children directly experiencing abuse and multiple forms of difficult abuse arise, the state's money increasingly goes towards those emergency situations, and the early intervention, the prevention services which stop these things happening in the first place are at risk of being hollowed out. So we're campaigning to seek to ensure that sufficient money is spent in the right ways by governments to help keep children safe, but also to help many more of us see and understand the simple things we can do to look out for and support children in our lives, in our communities.
Thank you so much for that. And even following on from that, you mentioned a very important point about how when, government funds are limited, they put it in the priority areas. But how do you think this will affect things such as social services?
Well, So social services are under real strain because they have legal obligations and responsibilities, rightly, to rescue and rehabilitate children who are in emergency situations. But if there's only so much money to go around, and increasing proportions of it goes into the emergency situations, then the children who are on the edge of risk or the threshold for intervention may rise, leaving more children in a difficult situation. So it's important that sufficient money is spent on children, but also that we can seek to design a system which is more joined up and organized around the realities of children's lives and can intervene earlier to support them. So, I am in awe and admire the extraordinary work which very hard-pressed, social workers are doing with very heavy caseloads in the system, but sometimes they're fighting against the odds because we have a system which is siloed and joined up around particular aspects in children's lives and designed, to be frank, for the convenience of the adults rather than the realities of how services join together for children. One of the most interesting projects that we're working on is called the Lighthouse in the NSPCC's building in North London, which is a one-stop shop for children who've experienced sexual abuse. So if you're in that part of London and something terrible happens to you as a young person, you can pretty immediately go to the Lighthouse, and under one roof, you've got the therapeutic support, you've got the police, you've got the doctors, all in a child-friendly environment, all having a single conversation about what the child wants and needs in that moment to help them see that what's happened to them is not their fault. That's very untypical compared with much of the rest of the country, where that poor child has to tell their story separately and in sequence to the doctor, then to the therapist, then to the police. And each time they're telling their story, they're being re-traumatized, and the process takes very much longer. It's much more expensive. So the redesign of public services is important, as well as the quantum of money that is spent on children.
Thank you so much for that. And following on from that, the Molly Russell Inquest highlighted the need for children to be safer online. What further measures can the government put in place apart from the online safety bill to protect children using the internet?
Well, we've put a lot of emphasis on requiring the government and the tech companies to face up to the fundamentals of child protection online. So the online safety bill is a vital measure. And before asking for even more, I'd really like to see that on the statute book. And it's almost there. And it's been 6 years since the NSPCC first called for the regulation of social media companies. And we are nearly there. Now, we wouldn't have written the legislation quite as it's been written, but it's a pretty good, strong piece of legislation. So we will welcome it when it's introduced. We're still arguing that there should be a child advocacy body as part of the regulatory arrangements. So a capacity to listen to and represent the voices and perspectives of children online in real time, because we think that if the system is going to shift from one which picks up the tragic pieces in the wake of deaths like Molly Russell's to a system which is designing protection into the services very much earlier, the regulator could do with an early warning system, which is hearing from children and young people as and when these risks are occurring, so that everything can adjust itself sooner. So that would be my current and next ask. Let's have an early warning system, and let's find a way of inserting young people's voices very much more prominently into the design and development of services which they are going to be accessing online. I think that quite a few of the tech companies, they're pretty sophisticated in listening to and learning from their customers when they launch services, but they talk about, innovating and learning by making and breaking. And that's all very well when you're not talking about the fundamental safety and well-being of children's lives. It is not fair and not appropriate to break children's lives in the process of innovating and developing your service. So we're not anti-innovation, and we're not anti-developing things that are right at the kind of cutting edge of how we're going to lead our lives online. But let's find a way together of iterating those services in a manner where children aren't the kind of collateral damage of development.
Thank you so much for that, because you've highlighted such an important point, which is tech giants. So following on from this, how will the NSPCC be working with tech giants to better protect children from dangerous online material?
Well, we would like to help them by inserting the voices and perspectives of young people into the way in which they develop their services and listen to their customers. And I think there's a will, as I say, to work in that sort of way, but they haven't quite appreciated the realities of children's lives in this context. So if we can be an amplifier and an enabler of young perspectives to help better services be developed in a faster and safer way, that would be brilliant.
Thank you so much. And the NSPCC has responded to around over 200,000 contacts. Is telephone the biggest channel that children can contact the NSPCC on?
No. So I think the figure you're referring to there is Childline's one-to-one counselling services. So yeah, in the last 12 months, Childline has engaged one-to-one with best part of 200,000 young people. Around 75 to 80% of those one-to-one conversations are instant message chats. So in the old days, you would go into a Childline counselling room and it would be a buzz of all kinds of voices chatting away. But now it's tap, 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 because most of this is written. And that's how young people want to engage with us. So the most popular route to have one-to-one counselling with Childline is through instant messaging. But increasingly, young people are wanting to chat to one another in a safe space and help solve one another's problems. So the Childline website is an increasingly popular and important resource where young people are going to seek assistance and help from one another. To those 200,000, you can add thousands and thousands more who are discussing with one another worries and concerns that they have in a safe environment where we can moderate and support them to understand that very often, what is happening to them is by no means unique. And it's really lovely to see the compassion that many young people have for one another and their willingness to share appropriately some of the options and choices online that young people might have. So the message boards, the online experience, just like everywhere else in our lives, is increasingly important in the services that we deliver. Though there still is, you still can call Childline 0800 1111.
Everyone deserves to feel safe and happy. If someone hurts you or makes you do something you don't want to do, that's not your fault. But it can still be really hard to talk about. The Lighthouse is a safe place where you can talk about things that have happened to you and make sense of them. The people here are here for you, to help you feel better and figure out what happens next. There's no rush, there's no pressure. Whenever you're ready, we're ready.
So much, Sir Peter, and that's really powerful. Even the fact that children have a safe space where they can support each other. So thank you for sharing that. So following on from that, you were knighted in 2021 for your services to children, young people, and the charitable sector. What do you enjoy most about working for the NSPCC, and why?
Well, I think it is knowing that the amazing employees and volunteers that I work with can make a palpable difference to young people's lives. So if ever I'm feeling it's kind of complicated or difficult, and child abuse and neglect is a really dark and difficult subject, but you can just pop along the corridor to Childline and hear and see the conversations which are taking place with young people that are making those young people's lives better than will otherwise be the case. So that's really fulfilling work. So that's definitely something that I enjoy. And then the other thing that I enjoy about the job is that we're overwhelmingly funded from voluntary donations. So there's an extraordinary range of people and organizations who give the NSPCC their time and their money to enable us to do what we do. So to have the opportunity to inspire them, to connect them with one another and create this sense of a really broad coalition of people from all sorts of walks of life. And the only thing really that unites them is their determination to fight for every childhood. I really like that sense of building unlikely coalitions in the pursuit of positive purpose.
Thank you so much for that. And outside of your role as the chief executive, you're the president of Somerset County Cricket Club.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So how do you think the season is currently going?
Well, my mum and dad were both Somerset members right from when I was born. So I had no choice but to be a Somerset supporter. And if you go to the cricket ground in Taunton, there's a brick which has their names engraved on it, which is lovely. And neither of them got to see me be the president of Somerset, which is an extraordinary title. The season, well, it's kind of mixed. So we won the T20 Blast County competition this season. So I am not just the president, I am a silverware winning president for Somerset, and there haven't been too many of them. But for those who follow cricket in detail, unfortunately, all our players pretty much have been scattered out to different teams to play for in this competition that's running at the moment called the 100. And there is no 100 team in the west of England. So Somerset is having to field a team of youngsters because all our best players have been stolen for the entirety of August, which, as you can imagine, I have slightly mixed feelings about. And as a consequence of having to play our youngsters at the moment, it's a wonderful development opportunity for them, but it's very, very challenging. So unfortunately, we've lost our last 3 games rather badly, but I can't blame the players or the coaches, because they're doing the best they can with the hand that they've been dealt. And there are some big questions about how the cricket fixtures are organised in this country, which people beyond my pay grade in the game of cricket need to get to grips with, I think.
Thank you so much for sharing. And outside of your role as the chief executive, what are your hobbies apart from cricket?
Apart from cricket, I like reading books, detective novels, trashy sort of thrillers. Do you know what? I'll let you into a secret, because I saw that the other day Rishi Sunak read Jilly Cooper's Bonk Buster novels from the 70s. I thought I'll give one of them a try. And so I read this, ended up being 800 pages of a Jilly Cooper novel about all sorts of salacious goings on in the world of show jumping. But imagine my surprise when about 2/3 of the way through, one of the key women characters turned out to be the deputy president of her local NSPCC fundraising group. And she was using the fact that she was at the NSPCC meeting as an alibi to go off and have an affair with someone that she really shouldn't have been. So that was a bit of a shock to me. Couldn't escape the NSPCC, even when I was reading this book, which Rishi Sunak apparently regards as an excellent piece of literature. I'm not sure I agree with him.
And what are your favourite books? If you had to pick your 3 favourites, what would they be?
3 favourite books. Wow. Oh, I needed notice of that question. On the cricket front, there's a really great book called Penguins Stop Play by a guy called, I think it's Harry Thompson. That about playing cricket for his sort of local team, but it's also about friendships and death. What else? What other books do I think are great? I can't. My mind's gone blank.
No problem.
My books are over there.
Oh wow, that's a lot of books.
That's a fair few books. Yeah. A lot of them are cricket books. There are cricket books and politics books.
Mm-hmm.
I like Alistair Campbell's diaries.
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like I'm reliving large chunks of my career when I read those. But then I like podcasts as well. Although I don't listen to Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart quite as much as I did when they first started on The Rest is Politics. I sort of feel like I know what they're going to think about any given issue now. And I'm just I like football. I'm an Ebbsfleet United season ticket holder, and I do like the Times football podcast. So that's another thing I spend too much time listening to, probably.
Thank you so much. And the final question the final 2 questions I'd like to ask you is, firstly, what will be some of the key priorities the NSPC will be focusing on in 2023 to 2024?
So we have 3 impact goals which we are working towards. I've probably mentioned each of them indirectly already. So the first is, we think everyone can play a part in keeping children safe. we want to make it as easy as possible for as many people as possible to take simple steps to look up and look out for children. So we just announced last week a fantastic partnership with 4 big gas companies. So when the gas engineers go in to service the boilers in people's houses, they will be trained in the basics of looking out for the abuse and neglect of children, not so they can become social workers themselves, but so they can just express a view or a worry if they see a child who they think might be in difficulty. So we're looking for all sorts of interesting and imaginative ways in which we can partner with organizations and individuals to play their part and say, yes, we're here for children. So that'd be number one. Second one is the online world should be as safe as the offline world, and we've talked quite a lot about that already. And the third one is that all children should be able to speak up and be heard and understood. And so that's where our school service and Childline are really important. And we want to make sure that our services are available and relevant and accessible to all the young people who could potentially benefit from them. No child should feel alone, or if something terrible is happening to them, that it is their fault. And we have very skilled volunteers and staff who can help them understand that they do have options, and that can be hugely liberating and life affirming to young people. So those would be the priorities, I think, at the moment.
Thank you so much. And the last question I'd like to ask you is, how can those watching this podcast give to the NSPCC?
Well, our website, nspcc.org.uk, tells you all about what we're up to. So you can give your money by clicking on the donate button, and small gifts are always welcome, especially if they're regular gifts, because you can plan against regular income out into the future. You can give your time by volunteering for the NSPCC. So you can look at the volunteer page on our website and see if there are options and opportunities to join our kind of coalition and play a part in keeping children safe, or you can come and work for us. And if you have a look on the NSPCC job vacancies page, there are some fantastic little clips from our staff who are working in all sorts of functions across the NSPCC, and they can tell you far better than I can about what it's like to work with us, why it's fulfilling, and the difference that you can make.
Thank you so much, Sir Peter, for such a fantastic interview. And thank you for coming onto the platform.
It's my pleasure. Great to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching my interview with Sir Peter Wanless. Please remember to subscribe, and I'll be back soon with another interview on the Micah McLean Talks YouTube channel.